Hello and welcome to Indiana Family Forum. No, you didn't tune into the wrong place. I'm Jeff Howe, Director of Communication for the American Family Association of Indiana. And today we've put Micah Clark on the couch to receive the questions. Today is our first of our Ask Micah questions. We've been letting people know that they can ask online questions to you. And we've taken some of those, plus we've taken, Micah, a couple of the questions that you've gotten just in emails,
right.
General things that we've heard from people that we thought would be helpful for people to hear answers for. So welcome to the couch, Micah.
Thank you.
This is your first time there. So first of all, before we get started, we have actually a really important election that's going to be happening on Tuesday. Talk to the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's been some confusion from a few people who've contacted me because we have a lot of candidates running right now who aren't even able to file yet. They're running for election next year. So we're already hearing TV ads for U.S. Senate, a few for governor, and those are not on the ballot Tuesday. What is on the ballot Tuesday are local municipal city elections, mayors, city councils, things like that. And several cities, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, some other large cities have major races for mayor. And so when you go, wherever you are in Indiana, when you go vote Tuesday, it will be for local elections, not for senator or governor or state house. This is for the state, for the local city races. And if you don't know who's on your ballot, and honestly, Jeff, there's so many candidates, we can't keep on top of every little city race. So you have to do your homework in the next few days, but you can Google or look up online, what is my ballot for Noblesville or for Indianapolis or for Muncie or wherever you are, and you will find a sample ballot and see names on there. Look at that ballot beforehand before you go vote and make your decisions to vote. And these elections probably won't have a huge turnout, especially outside of Indianapolis and Fort Wayne where you have some major races for mayor, which means your vote counts a lot more because far fewer people will be voting. So your vote is very important on Tuesday, and I hope you can cast an informed vote. We do not have voters' guides for this, but we will for next year.
That was actually one of the questions that came in. People were wondering, we've had iVoter online guides. A lot of people are like, well, there's nothing on there about the local elections. Right. Let's just say somebody has done their due diligence, they've done the homework, and they've gone and checked out the people that are on the ballot. How do they make a decision? What are the things that you should be looking for in the candidates that you're voting for?
Well, it's difficult for city races because a lot of times they don't campaign on issues that you and I care about a lot at AFA. That doesn't mean they don't address them. They do address issues like zoning ordinances for adult businesses, abortion clinics, other family issues. Certainly family aid is an issue at local level. And so if they do their research, it would be good to, what I typically do, people will ask me, and I will say, well, do you know so-and-so in my church who is a county council member or so-and-so who works for the city? It's good to ask those people, who do you know, who shares our values? If you have someone in your church or someone in your friend group who works for the city or who holds an elective office in the county, it's good to ask them because they interact with these people far more than we do at the local level. We interact with mayors a lot and city councils, but it's very sporadic depending on the issues. So ask people who know. And again, the reason we don't have voters' guides for this is because you got thousands of people running at these local offices. Yeah. We have to contract with iVoter Guide, pay them to survey candidates, and it's just, it comes up too quickly. Actually, their voter guide, they work on year round, and so every 2 years we have a voter guide, but they've been working on all year this year, and candidates haven't filed yet, but they're already working on a lot of those races. We just don't have the capacity to do local races.
Now, we've talked in the past, we've had a few guests on, you've talked to them about the upcoming elections in 2024. Mm-hmm. You said that, we're already seeing some TV ads. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are wanting to know, when are those the actual candidates for sure going to be locked in? I know we've seen Mike Pence has dropped out of the presidential race, a couple other people have. I'm assuming that there may be some people who actually don't end up on the ballot for governor, maybe for Senate. I know there was a hearing on whether one would be eligible recently on that. When are those going to be locked in so people
Yeah.
can start really deciding who those candidates are they want to support?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact date, but it's early February, maybe late January, but I believe it's early February is the filing deadline. And so if they miss the filing deadline, they can't run. But the filing deadline hasn't opened yet for some of these races as well, which is probably going to open in December, maybe January 1. They can then file up until February 7th or whatever the cutoff date is. They know those dates. So one of the hurdles for U.S. Senate and governor, and I don't really like this, but it is the law. We operate under that. But those two races, statewide races, have to get 500 signatures per congressional district, and it's very, very difficult. You've done that work before. You know how hard it is with several candidates, especially in Marion County, to get registered voters to sign. And when you go to one of these congressional districts and turn these in at the county offices, the requirement is 500. Most candidates will get 700. In some areas, they'll try and get over 1,000, because if they can't read the name, depending on the county clerk you're working with, they may strike those names. If you fall below 500, you're not on the ballot. So all the campaigns for governor and Senate right now are working to get signatures. And I would encourage people too. I want people involved in the political process. I want choices on the ballot. So I've signed these signature requirements for all sorts of candidates who I might never vote for.
And you don't have to, just because you sign that doesn't mean you're going to vote for them.
Right,
And you can actually do it for the other party too.
And I've done that too.
It doesn't, invalidate your vote or anything like that. That's just so that they can have access to the ballot, so that people can vote on it.
Yeah, it's not about party identification, it's about registered voters.
Yeah.
And so I've signed them for several candidates. Of course, I'm only going to vote for one, but I want to see them on the ballot, and it doesn't commit you to that at all. So I would encourage people, if you see a candidate doing that, feel free to sign that. It helps them a lot.
Wonderful. And that election takes place on Tuesday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. here?
Yeah, the city elections are Tuesday. Early voting's already started. Next year, the big battle is the primary for May, and then you've got the November elections, which will be presidential election. Next year we have president, U.S. senator, state governor, all congressional districts, all 100 Indiana House members, half of the Senate, because they have 4-year terms every 2 years, 25 of the 50 run. And then you have some local races too. It's going to be, if you think you're getting campaign mail now, it's going to be a flood city.
Well, there's a lot of people running. There's new people running for House seats in Indiana, especially District 5. Is there any other districts that we'll be seeing candidates?
We have, I don't know if we have any. We have an open seat in Jim Banks' district up in Fort Wayne, because Jim is running for U.S. Senate. So, and there are 6 or 7 candidates on the Republican side running, a couple on the Democrat side. So that's going to be a very heated battle. You've got several state house legislators who are not running again, and so there are going to be some open seats there. I've already heard of a couple legislators who have strong primary challengers already. So we're going to have our share of battles. And I would like to say this too. One of the most important races next year that you're not going to hear a lot about are school board races. School board races have become extremely important on protecting parental rights, protecting children, and also on your taxes, because schools deal with referendums and spending and property taxes. School board is very important, and they've become very expensive. They've become very hotly contested. The teachers' unions have gotten involved in this, and so many conservative groups are too. So don't forget your school board members next year, because they are going to be very important. And in that regard too, you're going to get hit up for all sorts of campaign contributions, campaign volunteer work. I would like you to prayerfully consider and think about, does Donald Trump need your $50 check? He would say yes. I would say your $50 goes a lot further if you give it to a school board candidate who you believe in. I'm not saying don't support the presidential candidate of your choice or the Senate candidate. Of course, do that if that's where you're led. But you can have a lot of effect on these smaller races, and they're desperate for help because everyone's attention's on the bigger race. But 25 volunteers for a school board candidate can make a huge difference. 25 volunteers on a presidential race, when Indiana has a late primary, it's very possible that the presidential pick will already be chosen by May.
Yeah.
So be a good steward of your time and your resources, and help those where I think it can make the most difference.
Now, to take a little bit of a turn, one of the questions someone had is, what are your thoughts on the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, and what are you hearing from friends in regards to what he may or may not be doing as Speaker?
Yeah, I didn't know much about him. Hadn't even really even heard of him, but it's a really good measure to see the left react to him. He's getting blasted for being a solid Christian. You know, they're going after him believing in the Bible. That should be it's a red flag to them. It's a green flag for us. Mm-hmm. I'm glad we have a speaker with a faith, a strong faith. Everything I've heard so far is pretty good. It's very difficult, though, when you only have a few 5 or 7 member majority, and it's like herding cats. Not everyone agrees on things, so it's very difficult to get things done. But I hope he'll do a good job. I know that Congressman Banks put out a very nice statement about him because Representative Johnson worked with Jim Banks in the Republican Study Committee, which is a conservative group of legislators who work on policy. So I think we may see some good things from him, and we'll see what happens.
The other thing about the speaker is one of the kind of the things that you don't see every day, you know, having worked on the Hill myself, is that the speaker does a lot of work on behalf of candidates.
Yes.
And that isn't necessarily seen by everybody, and it's not a policy thing, but in the background, you know, they're making sure that the right candidates are getting elected, the right candidates are getting the kind of funding they need. They're making a lot of decisions on who gets money at critical times, depending on how they're doing in their race. So that position isn't just about the legislation part of it. It's also about, you know, are we going to have a good chance to have a majority going forward?
And they will go after seats where, for example, maybe Donald Trump won, but a Democrat was elected in that congressional district if he won in that state, or a district that has more Republicans than Democrats, so the Democrat may hold. They're going to go for those marginal districts, those swing districts. I don't know if we have any of those in Indiana. I don't think we do. It's possible you could have a competitive race for Congress next year. They probably won't get involved in Congressman Banks' seat around Fort Wayne because it's a Republican seat. They'll just let the primary play out and support the nominee there if they need to. And the Democrats do the same thing with their leadership. And they may pour money into a race. You know, many years they poured a lot of money into the seat held by Rudy Yoakum, but which was held by Jackie Walorski. Yeah. And Jackie, I think, won her first race by only a few points. In fact, she lost by 1% or 2%, and then won by a few percent, and then built that up to winning by 11%. They might look at that district. I don't know. It's been redrawn. It's probably a pretty safe seat, but there may be some things pop up. You can always have a strong candidate pop up and make a seat competitive.
And that's something actually that a lot of people don't realize is a lot of these districts are a little bit different.
They've been redrawn.
And the congressperson that you voted for last time may not be the one you vote for in
Yeah, for a few
24.
people that's true because they redrew the districts in 20, which went into place in 21 or 22. So some of these are new districts, and that means these members have to work with them a lot harder to be known. Yeah. And so that happens every 10 years. And I don't know. I know that the first district, which was always a strongly Democrat district, is a little more Republican now. I mean, remember, Donald Trump, not that he's the be-all and end-all, but he won Indiana by 19 points. Republicans have a statewide advantage, and so they've kind of moved the lines around. That district is a little more competitive. Andre Carson's district in Indianapolis is deeply Democratic and wouldn't change. But I would say
first district last time around with the new redistricting, actually they thought maybe there's an opportunity there to pick up a seat.
Right, because he was a freshman. Yeah. Frank Mervan, the son of a state senator who I knew very well, a Democrat state senator, was friends with Frank Sr., fairly conservative Democrat, and Frank Mervan, I think, presented himself that way. I haven't followed his voting record very closely. But, you know, it's always difficult for a congressman in their first year when they're freshmen. The more they're in there, the stronger they get typically, unless their voting record's really out of step. We have a system that where you get entrenched. But and we do have another freshman in Erin Houchin, who took Trey Hollingsworth's seat. And so she'll be a freshman. Whether or not the Democrats target her for that, I don't know. It's a pretty Republican district, but it's quite possible they could.
Yeah. Now,
we have an open seat in my congressional district where I live.
Yes.
In Hamilton County, up north through Tipton, Grant, those other counties. Victoria Sparks is not running again. So you have a very competitive race for the primary, at least. And that district's a little more competitive than some of the others, maybe 55 Republican, 45% Democrats. It could swing with all the population changes in Hamilton County. I think it will be somewhat competitive. Former State Representative Chuck Goodrich is running. A couple other people are running. Guy I know from my church, Max Engling. Mark Hurt, former attorney who worked with Dan Coates. And there's a couple others I'll probably miss. But by the time May rolls around, there may be 5 or 6 candidates to choose from there.
Yeah. One of the questions concerning, again, the election next year, and we talk a lot about it because even though it's next year, all the campaigns are starting now.
Right.
This person asks, who is likely to replace Mike Braun as Indiana senator, and will they be conservative?
Well, there are 3 people I know of that are running, and I may miss one, but 3 large candidates. And the Democrat running is Mark Carmichael, someone I know somewhat from my years in the legislature. He was a state representative years ago, so I know who he is. He's what I would call a rank and file Democrat, left of AFA of Indiana on a lot of issues. He's pretty strongly pro-abortion, pro-gay rights, pretty consistent with the Democrat Party platform. I think he will probably be their nominee. He's the only name I've heard, and he does have some credentials, having been a legislator and having run for other offices. I assume that will be their nominee, but you don't know yet. On the other side, you have 2 candidates that have mentioned so far who are already running ads. One is a guy named John Rust, who is his family runs Rose Acre Egg Farm, yeah, and is very prosperous. In fact, you see Rose Acre eggs in Kroger and Walmart, places like that. So, and he's up on TV running ads. He's also, yesterday was in court because we have a law on the books that was passed that requires a candidate to have voted in the last 2 elections. And
for the party.
For the party he's running for.
Yeah.
The purpose of that, and I agree with this law, is that I think if you're going to run for office, particularly a major office, you need to have been involved in politics enough to care enough to vote. Yeah. And it's not like he was overseas serving in the military. He wasn't, for whatever reason. His voting record's inconsistent. So he went to court to challenge that. We'll see what happens. But the purpose of that, I think, is to make sure the Democrat nominee is a solid Democrat and the Republican nominee is a solid Republican. That was the intent behind the bill. Whether or not it's constitutional will be determined. The judge took a ruling yesterday for a hearing for several hours, and we'll see how he rules. But the other candidate in that race is someone I've known for, 20 years.
And
you have too.
Also.
Jim Banks. I knew Jim even before he was a state senator, but worked with him very closely as a state senator. Strongly pro-family, strongly pro-life, solid conservative. And Jim is the current congressman for I believe, I may get this wrong, 4th district. It's the north east corner of Indiana, Fort Wayne, up in that area. He served there for several years, and so his name ID is pretty good. But Rust has a lot of money to build up his name ID, and it could be somewhat competitive. We'll see. The argument that Rust is using is he's the outsider. He's not the establishment choice. But I think Jim has a strong conservative record to show he's not Mr. Establishment. But we'll see how that plays out. I would think that Jim has the upper hand, being an incumbent congressman. But, Mike Braun, speaking of him, who is running for Senate, or running for governor and left the Senate that Jim's running for, he took out 2 congressmen, and he was running as an outsider. So it's possible that could happen. But the U.S. Senate race is going to be a big race. And Mike Braun, leaving the U.S. Senate, is running for governor, and we've got several candidates in that field too.
Yeah. One last question, and this is one that I think both of us hear a lot from friends and then people in the community whenever we talk to them. I am getting discouraged about the current state of our nation. I feel like what I'm doing doesn't matter. Do you have any encouraging words?
Well, I don't know what they're doing. I would love to maybe talk to them about what they're doing. Chances are they are making a difference. You know, a lot of differences we don't see this side of heaven. We are called to do what's right, to be active, to be good stewards of the blessings we've been given as citizens. And a lot of the things that we do, we don't see the results of here. But I'll tell you a story real quickly. I've told this many times. There was a billboard put up in Indianapolis on I-465, several of them, several years ago. That was quite offensive. Had women in bikinis in it, and the slogan was kind of raunchy for a radio station. I asked a few people who complained about moms taking kids to school and kids seeing this. Well, call the billboard company. So after I got a few calls, I thought, well, I'll call the billboard company too. I didn't realize the billboard company actually owned the radio station that was running the ad, and I thought, this isn't going to work. But I called the billboard company. I met with the president. He gave me a tour. And halfway through the tour, he said, you know, I've got kids too. And when I saw this ad, I thought it was kind of on the edge. He said, we're going to pull this ad and make them put something else up. So, of course, I wrote about that as a victory. What I never told people was he got 11 phone calls. Only 11 phone calls to pull thousands of dollars of ads down. So sometimes if we don't do something, what if those 11 people hadn't called? What if only one person called? Sometimes it doesn't take thousands of people to make a difference, but it takes us to be faithful to make a difference. And I've seen that time and time again. One phone call at the right time can sway a legislator. And one letter of the editor, one talking to a person at church can change their vote. And we've had many times in Indiana, Jeff, as you know, where we've seen state legislators win by 11, 12, 50, 60 votes out of thousands cast. Yeah. And so
we've also seen 10, 15 phone calls to the legislature on an issue move a representative's vote in the positive direction too. We've seen that many times.
And that's why I kind of jokingly said, well, I wonder what that person's doing that they don't think is making a difference. Yeah. A lot of times it's strategic. Yes, 11 people can call a legislator, but if they do that over 11 days, it's not as important. But if you get your 10 friends to call in one day, that makes a difference because they get 10 calls in one day. And so we need to be strategic, but God calls us to do what's right and to stand for truth. And we need that more today than ever before. And I know it's intimidating. You know, I know you get blasted on social media, but we need to do what's right. And legislators appreciate hearing from constituents. They really do. So a phone call to a legislator or a city council member. I just had a meeting with a city council member, county council member, a few days ago. And he'd just gotten off the phone with a constituent, and he had 4 constituent calls in a row. And he was a little flustered, I think, because he had a meeting come up. But he said, you know, I really appreciate when I hear from people because sometimes they see things going on in our town I didn't know about. And he said, so I'm checking into this one particular call about this question. And he said, I think they're right. And he said, I'm going to bring it up at the council meeting because I didn't know this was in this thing. And so it's a legitimate concern.
And, you know, one of the things that I tell people all the time, too, is, you know, don't always be negative.
Right.
You know, be positive. When somebody's doing a good job, trust me, when they hear positive feedback and thanks, they really appreciate it because you think you're getting blasted when you're bringing it up. These guys, women, and men are getting blasted, full blast, a lot of times from the local media and all the activist groups, and they really appreciate it when they hear somebody come and thank them for taking a hard stand. And that's a way maybe to balance out. Maybe sometimes you feel, you know, I think a lot of people feel frustrated because they're trying to win a battle over a piece of legislation, when sometimes the greatest battle you can win is winning friends that can help in the future, or
I'm sure that my numbers aren't correct. This is just a guess, but when you call and thank a legislator for voting the right way, just assume he's probably gotten 10, 50 negative calls.
Yeah.
So if you think, does my thanking them with a note or an email or a phone call, does that impact them? It sure does, because they get hammered all the time.
Yeah. Well, Micah, thanks for sitting down
Sure.
and answering some of these questions. Just to let you know that every week in our email, there is a link. If you'd like to ask a question to Micah, we're going to be doing this on a regular basis. Even during the session, when Micah does some of his updates on slower weeks, we may grab a couple of these questions and sit down and just talk through them. But this is your chance to ask a question. A lot of people think, nobody really cares about my question. But I'll tell you, a lot of times when we're reading the questions, we're like, oh gosh, we've heard that one like two or three times from people. So it's something that you do, take the time. Just sit down, write out your question. Can't always guarantee we'll get to every single question, because sometimes we get a lot of them at a time, but we'll try to answer most of them. Or if there's an opportunity, maybe Michael will write on in the email itself an answer to that question. We want to thank you for joining us on today's Indiana Family Forum. We hope you have a great weekend.